Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Think Before You Hate podcast. I'm Alex with the Chicago Commission on Human Relations, and we're the city's civil rights agency. We work diligently to fight discrimination and prejudice here in the city of Chicago by enforcing the Chicago Human Rights Ordinance as well as the Chicago Housing Ordinance. And today we have a special guest, Ilana Khan, who's the Executive Director of the Illinois Commission on Discrimination and Hate Crimes. And without further ado, Ilana, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. Will you please tell us a little bit about yourself, where'd you grow up, and what in your life led you to work in civil rights?
I was born in Milwaukee, and when I was 11, my family moved to Salt Lake City, Utah, which is a funny place to be Jewish. My grandparents were, 3 of the 4 of them were immigrants. The one who was born here always took it as a point of pride that she was born American, born in America. But I grew up with a legacy of Jews in America being folks who fought for justice and who believed in laws and in the power of laws to make us safe and to give us opportunity. And then we moved to Utah and got, firsthand this experience of what it felt like to be such an extreme minority. I advocated to not have a Christian prayer at my junior high school graduation and learned how to speak up. Prayer is fine in the right places, of course, but, not in school. And certainly not a particular religion's prayer. So I learned to advocate for myself and learned the experience of being an outsider. And I think that really informed my seeking for belonging and my sort of figuring out how to use tools and do bridge building to help make us safe by having other people learn how to have our backs, have them care about us, and really also learned that relationships are the key to all of that.
Mm-hmm. Perfect. Now, will you please tell us about the Illinois CDHC, its mission, and what your role as the executive director entails?
Sure. So the Illinois Commission on Discrimination and Hate Crimes is housed in the Illinois Department of Human Rights, and it was reactivated in 2021. It actually has an important history, which is that it was started in 1999 and fell apart. And then was started again, and then fell apart again. And to me, that's a cautionary tale because it fell apart because of conflict between commissioners, and so that's an important part of the story to me. Because the mission of the commission is to, in plain words, to strengthen responses to hate, including supporting victims and communities affected by hate, and to develop a range of preventions and to make sure that we at the state level and also folks in communities do our best to prevent hate. Mm-hmm. We're a governor's commission. We have 21 commissioners who represent various communities and also folks in key offices. The reason I told the cautionary tale is that a fundamental belief of mine is that relationships really are the cellular matter of community and also of any kind of change we want to create in communities. So part of when I think about the commission, part of what's important is that we get to know each other and get to care about each other. I've been with the commission for a little over 2 years. One of the important things we did was to define hate, meaning I think it's one of those things like pornography, like we know it when we see it, but there's a lot of debate over what the definition actually is. You're welcome. Like when I give talks, I'll say, it's not the feeling we have about cilantro. I've become a fan of cilantro. But what we've done that is, I think, of value, especially in Illinois, where there's a possibility to have civil penalties for hate crimes, is that we've defined hate and its categories. So we've categorized hate into 3 different categories. One is hate crimes. We've categorized acts of hate, pardon me. One of them is hate crimes, which are the easiest to understand because it's all written into the law. And in Illinois, we have very strong hate crimes. We have a very strong hate crimes law. So hate crime has to include, it's all written into the statute. It has to include a specific crime, and it has to include a specific bias motivation. The second category is bias-motivated civil rights violations, which are also an expression of hate or bias. Mm-hmm. So harassment, discrimination, etc. And then the third category is the most difficult, I would say, the most difficult to understand, which is legal acts of hate. It is perfectly legal to stand on the street and say horrible things about people based on their, actual or perceived identity. It's legal. And actually, we've had some reports recently. I've heard 2 recent reports that have come to us of somebody who was harassed with, for sure, hate speech, targeted, one because he was Jewish and one because he was black. And the person who was harassed ended up getting violent and then became the person penalized, which is an interesting and horrible situation. But the commission really has 5 priority areas, the way we've organized it. One is supporting victims. Another one is building capacity around the state. To quote myself, hate is a local issue, and meaning that people may get radicalized online. They may have, influences through their phone, online, social media, but when they get off their phone, they live in a place, and there are, they may work in a place, they may go to school in a place, they may live in a family, and then their expression is absorbed and experienced in that community, and prevention also needs to take place locally. So each of our communities, and Chicago does a fabulous job of this, but each of our communities can do a lot to develop the range of preventions. So that's the second one, building capacity in communities. The third is increasing education and training. Fourth is ensuring strong enforcement of laws and policies. So that includes things like increasing training for law enforcement so that they can recognize and then appropriately report acts of hate, particularly without re-traumatizing people. And then the fifth is to convene, facilitate, coordinate, act as subject matter experts for the state, whatever's needed, basically learning and sharing resources. So what does that mean? Those are a lot of words. Right. And really, I would say, I point to 3 of our big projects now. One of them is Help Stop Hate. We started just over a year ago. We launched this helpline. People can report acts of hate online or by phone. We have a call center, and get connected to helpful resources. We've had over 700 reports in the first year and are continually trying to spread the word so people know about it. We also we are inviting communities we're sort of open sourcing it. We want communities to use the helpline, to use it as a campaign of their own, basically. Partially because we refer people to resources, and we want those resources to be good and relevant and local when possible. The second thing we're doing, and actually this is interesting, when we started Help Stop Hate, it had 2 purposes. One, to help people, and the second one, to get data about hate. And we learned throughout this last year that sometimes those interests are actually in tension with each other. There's in conflict, and you have to choose. So, for example, in choosing what questions are on the intake form or what questions the call specialists ask, if we were prioritizing data, we would ask a ton of questions. It would be a very long form, and we wouldn't allow anyone to say other about anything. And we decided, actually, we want this to be as accessible as possible to fill in the need for data. It's a long-term process to build, we've called it a data hub, but to be able to have good data on an ongoing basis about acts of hate throughout the state. So we commissioned a study that it's an 18-month study that last spring it started, and we should have the first reports by the end of 2026. And that's, a step along the way toward an ongoing way being able to gather data from, there are community-based organizations that gather reports about hate. That's important to know. There are all sorts of ways that we can do this. So we're working on that. And then the third is, I've already mentioned this sort of without putting it into, in talking about what we do otherwise, but it is really community capacity building. How do we get resources to the community level? So we've created a proposal, we have a plan to do pretty intensive and strategic work to deliver technical assistance and training and also grants to communities for them to build out the kind of prevention work that's right for them. And it's built on the understanding that every community is different. The people who work in communities know their communities best. We're never going to come in and say this is how it needs to be done. We might say, hey, we have knowledge about best practices. There are a lot of choices you can make, but to really work, our intention is to, and the work that we do now, I already visit a lot of communities, but to listen and to share resources and to help sort of build out what's right for them.
Perfect. Now, which communities or issues in Illinois do you find are often overlooked and require special outreach or attention?
It's such an interesting question. And everyone. That's sort of the basic assumption of what we do, that everyone does. Urban people and rural people and people of all races, everybody and all religions and all abilities, physical or otherwise. I think these are hard times, and one could say that this is an era that's defined by grievance, like that people feeling aggrieved and feeling unheard and feeling hurt and wanting to, and I think of grievance as taking your pain and pointing it at, blaming someone else for it. But there is, so I'm never going to tell you whose needs are more important than others' needs. There are those communities that are being targeted now particularly. And I would say there are those communities that are less comfortable, less trusting of law enforcement and government, and therefore less likely to get help. That for sure. But I'm very mindful of this sort of competitive victimhood of people telling people, you're not actually left behind. Like, if you only knew, and that isn't, if you only knew what it was like to be one of my people. So I'm very mindful that, we all of us deserve to be able to live as our full selves in our community with dignity and to be treated with respect. One of the things that's especially concerning is the way hate can affect a whole community. Like, one of the features of acts of hate is that they don't harm just the individual victim. They harm the whole community. And I know that when somebody from my community is targeted, there was a man who was attacked earlier this year, who was shot. It creates vibrations in the whole community, and people are and this is true of every community, people are more inclined to stay home. They're less inclined to go out in places where they might encounter something, uncomfortable.
Right, the fear spreads.
Yeah, there is a loss of productivity at work, and it's not just the person who is directed. Like, that is sort of the point of hate crimes, is that they are intended to tell us that we don't belong. They're intended to hurt us because we belong to that particular community.
Right, yeah. That all makes sense.
So actually one of the things that we're doing, understanding that people are less inclined to report if they don't have great trust in law enforcement and government. And I think that what we're seeing this year, especially the immigration activities here and some of the kidnapping that we've seen take place here, that what we've realized is that we have to actually sort of cast a wider net and try to reach the folks who work with or might have contact with targeted communities. So we're focusing on, we just started a big library campaign, and we sent packets to 420 libraries around the state with bookmarks and posters and ideas for programming and invitations to have us come. But we've done some outreach to social workers, and we're focusing this next year on colleges and universities and on faith communities, really to increase knowledge about what hate looks like, and to sort of open the door so that anyone who might be working with somebody or sitting with somebody who has experienced an act of hate can say, hey, that actually sounds like a hate crime. And so, here are the resources that might be helpful to you.
Are there examples of other innovations you could provide for our audience at the city level that helped inspire state-level changes or vice versa? I
think that there are innovations in how we think about hate, and then there are programmatic innovations. So the innovations in thinking about it, my professional experience before this was really with working with targeted communities, with sort of victims. And when I entered this, I've learned so much in the last 2.5 years that if we really want to prevent hate, we have to think about the people who are vulnerable to expressing it. So it's become pretty widespread in the field. If there's a field of extremism and hate, and there are different terms for it, targeted violence, etc. But there is we understand hate as a public health issue, and for sure the way it affects a community. You can see that as a public health, there are public health effects, like what I said about the man who was shot, and how, when somebody's a victim, then the whole community's affected, that for sure. But also thinking about what are the factors that lead somebody, or that could lead somebody, to commit an act of hate. And there's, though there's no one path, there are social, situational, and individual factors that could be part of making somebody, leading somebody to do something awful to someone else. It's pretty common that people who commit hate crimes somewhere in their past have some traumatic experience or an adverse childhood experience. And interestingly, researchers say that one of the common features of people who join extremist groups is a low tolerance for ambiguity. So there is all of this knowledge of thinking about hate as a public health issue, and thinking about what can we do early so that we prepare people to live in a complicated world, so that we strengthen, the work of Robert Putnam is relevant, the work of building social capital. He wrote Bowling Alone, and there was a film that came out, I think it was last year, called Join or Die, and he says, in it, there's a quote, he said, your chances of dying in the next year are reduced by 50% if you join one group or one club. So even just, going bowling once a week, or going to a house of worship or something like that. So thinking about it as a public health issue helps us think about what are the things on the communal level that we can put into place to create more of a sense of belonging and to create more connections. And then there are, what are the things we need to do so that people know how to intervene, so that people know how to have conflict respectfully, so that we can increase our own capacity to hear things we don't agree with without turning it into an us versus them sort of, where the only thing you can do is win or lose, as opposed to, have conflict and grow. Conflict isn't inherently bad. It's a human experience.
And not everything has to be a zero-sum game.
Right. Almost nothing has to be a zero-sum game,
right?
Except maybe the Packers and the Bears. But then the programmatic innovation, programmatic innovations, I actually think that there are really wonderful things happening in Chicago, and I'm not just saying that, but I think that the Commission is doing really excellent work that could be replicated in other communities, like victim advocacy. When we get a report to help stop hate about somebody in Chicago who has experienced a hate crime or who's having a neighborhood conflict, we always send them to the Commission, because there's going to be somebody who's going to reach out to them, who's going to get involved and care about them, not just about taking the report and moving on. I think that's really important. And sort of one of the ingredients is centering the victims and their needs. The Chinese American Service League has an anti-hate action center, and they do the same kind of thing, like very individual focused. They're going to work with you to help you get the resources you need, make sure you fill out the right forms, right, etc. I think the Commission's work on mediation is right on. I am thinking a lot about, are there, especially with the loss of the National Community Relations Service, which has been basically eliminated, and most people don't know about them, but they called themselves, they're written into the 1964 Civil Rights Act, and one of their prime functions was to do community mediation between communities in conflict, not individuals, but communities. And we had just started working with them, as the Commission had just started working with them. So we're really thinking, with the loss of this really important national resource that was so effective that nobody knows about them, by the way. Small digression. I got to know them when I was in Milwaukee and the Sikh temple was attacked. And they came right in and started working with the U.S. attorney and working with the affected community, and they did very wonderful work. So we're thinking mediation, it exists on the city level. Are there things that can be replicated in other communities, or that we can implement on the state level? And it's, we have limited capacity, limited resources, but I think it's essential, right? Because one of the features of mediation is being heard.
Right.
It's essential. The last thing I'll say that I think is it's an innovation, but it's also like the most basic, simple thing ever that I've seen in the city of Moline has done a lot to strengthen social cohesion. They have a monthly Moline, Illinois, in the Quad Cities. They've done a lot. They have a mayor who really gets it, and they have monthly programs to bring people together. They've had like film screenings and resource fairs where different community organizations can come share their things, what they do. And it's genius, of course, in our online world because it's about people knowing their neighbors. It's like the simplest, most basic human thing. It's the most obvious thing that we don't do. So I think is just vitally important that community leaders, that all of us actually, it's not just community leaders, each of us has the ability to work on strengthening social cohesion. And I think it's funny to call it an innovation, but I think it is.
Yeah. Now, would you be able to tell us your favorite success story of creating positive change while working with the Illinois CDHC?
It's tricky to talk about successes when we are definitely living in a time that doesn't just feel, it's scarier than before. We were talking the other day about how, in the before times, many of us had, I think of it like as the torso, we had all of this capacity like for bad things to happen before we flipped our lid. And now it's like the bottom is all the way, is up here, and it just takes a few things, and then people go bananas. And that's scary. But it's also, I feel like we are being goaded to outrage and to have us versus them thinking, to have the zero-sum thinking. So it's hard to talk about successes when we're seeing an increase of hate, an increase of sort of outrage over everything, an inclination to blame other people for everything when, like often what's underneath all of it is hurt, what would happen if we just like lived with a little hurt. But I feel like the commission I'm really its first permanent director. Not that I'm permanent. It's a funny way to talk about a person, but hired to stay director. So we've built a whole structure. We've done a lot of work. And I would say the things that I'm proud of, I can talk about it that way, are our work engaging communities. It is important to me that relationship and listening is at the foundation of them. This last year we visited 10 communities, but when I say visit, I mean like spent multiple days there, had listening sessions, had sometimes community conversations. We had created, at the Department of Human Rights, created a bystander intervention training that we launched in Carbondale in August. We'll meet with mayors, we'll meet with the heads or folks who work at human rights or human relations commissions. We did a training in Moline for Moline and Rock Island about the Human Rights Act and about Help Stop Hate. So I think that community outreach and really caring about local life and understanding that our job is to listen as much as it is to talk, which feels, of course, funny because I've talked for like 25 minutes straight. The other thing, and I think that training in Moline was pretty exciting. It was Moline and Rock Island commissions. That was pretty exciting. But we held a conference in October in partnership with the city of Champaign, and they're very wonderful. Convened people. They came from across the state, and it was called Illinois Together Against Hate, Human Rights in Action, because every name has to have a colon.
Of course.
Yes. And it was focused on, there were sort of two tracks. One was human rights law, understanding, fair housing, what's new in the Human Rights Act, et cetera, and, how do we enforce it? And the second was hate prevention. We had a workshop on social cohesion. We had a session on community mediation. And then our keynote speaker was from Peril. It was Cynthia Miller-Idris, who talked about what they're seeing. Peril is Polarization and Extremism Research and Innovation Lab at American University. And they do very fine evidence-based work on hate prevention. So she talked, and she was fabulous. And then she also talked about her new book, which is about misogyny and extremism. So I thought it was exciting. I think it was the first. I know Chicago has had conferences, I think led by the CCHR, and but I think it was the first such state conference. That was exciting. And I would say that the way I understand the message, and it feels critical right now, is that we all have power. Like there are things that can happen. There are laws that can be passed. There are laws that can be improved. we happen to have strong hate crimes and human rights laws in Illinois on the state level, city ordinances. I mean, we have strong laws, but there are things that actually each of us can do. And to me, that's always the message. Like there are changes that we can make in our personal lives. We can, from training ourselves in conflict management, what I said before, also increasing our capacity to live with disagreement, learning to listen, monitoring our kids' online lives, maybe monitoring our own online lives.
Right.
There's some pretty awful stories about, the things that young people particularly, but not only, are seeing online. And there are people out there who want to manipulate us. So I think we have to be vigilant, actually, and there's a lot of work to be done. The last thing I'll say about that is, to me, the question is, who is getting served by my outrage here? Like, who is trying to manipulate me and why? What is this doing for them? And I would like to see, we were talking like, are there legislative fixes? Like, could we put in a screen before every social media post, which of course is insane, that couldn't happen. But could there be something that's like, take a breath and let's think about who's trying to manipulate us? Because there are, bad actors. The other thing I will say is that I think that we have, as residents or citizens, people who live in a place where there are elected leaders, I think we have to expect a lot of them. And I think we have to push them to change the way they talk, frankly. I think it's enticing to react to ugly rhetoric with more ugly rhetoric, or to point out what the other side is doing that's wrong, which sometimes sometimes is important and necessary, ends up not being terribly effective at convincing the folks on the other side, or even shoring up support on your side, it turns out. There's really interesting work coming out of University of Chicago about that. But I think we have to really push our leaders to lower the temperature, to stop with the us and them, which only deepens divides. I think we have to be equal opportunity railers, as in when we call things out, we have to do it because we're committed to the ideas and the principles, rather than just calling it out on the other side. And I think we need leaders who can see that if one community in our shared community is not doing well, we're all not going to be doing well. Like we're all connected.
Right. And if you think you're too small to make a difference, try falling asleep with a mosquito in the room.
Oh, nice. True.
It's true. I'm not sure where I got that quote. I had heard that quote a while ago, but it's one of my favorite quotes.
That's good.
Well, looking ahead, what is your vision for how civil rights organizations should evolve to better meet the needs of underserved communities?
It's very hard to answer, but I go back to this idea of competitive victimhood. I think that we have to listen to people when they tell us that they're hurting or they're scared or they feel threatened. And I'm not saying, we have to listen to them, and it has to matter. It can't be that it only matters if you belong to this particular community. How people feel determines their actions, and if people don't feel like they can take a breath, I think of it as having like an oxygenated brain. If you feel threatened, you're going to see limited options. So I think we have a responsibility to each other to listen, be empathic, and actually be compassionate to each other, even if we don't agree. I think it's important. I think it's really important. And part of that is addressing the trauma. Like a lot of people in communities are walking around traumatized, and it would be easy to say, well, that was a long time ago, or that, come on, it wasn't such a big deal, or that didn't happen exactly to you. And so what? I mean, my point is that what communities experience is completely relevant and in a very practical way. And if we want our communities to be better, we have to actually listen to communities and communicate to them that it matters.
Now, as we're wrapping up this conversation, I'm going to ask you a question that I ask all of our guests. In your opinion, what can our listeners do in their everyday lives to combat hate and discrimination?
I love that. I feel like I've answered that the whole time.
Right. Maybe if you could expound on that.
I would say lean into community, find ways to connect with people, which is sometimes can be hard, actually. Being home is very cozy sometimes. And I would say let it be okay that you have conflict with somebody else, and learn how to do all the things that make it possible for that conflict to be healthy, productive conflict. Part of that is emotional regulation. Part of it is not taking things personally. Like, people get wound up. It feels like it's about me. I'm conflict averse, funny enough, but I know it's not about me. Yeah, increasing our capacity to be with people with whom we disagree, not take it personally, develop skills, and lean into people.
Yeah. Absolutely, that's a perfect answer. And thank you very much for joining our podcast today. Now, if any one of our listeners wants to reach out to the Illinois Commission on Discrimination and Hate Crimes, how could they do so? What social media outlets are you on?
Well, we're on Facebook and Instagram.
Mm-hmm.
But we also, the easiest way to get to us is ilstophate.org. Routes to the ORG, and then you can click. It's where people can report acts of hate. And when you do that, it links to the CDHC's website. We say CDHC like everybody knows it. But if I say it enough times.
I've been using it.
Yeah, it's, a whole bunch of letters.
It's a long, I wouldn't say acronym, but letters. But thank you very much. And thank you very much for our listeners today for joining us on another episode of the Think Before You Hate podcast. Remember, if you or anybody you know feels that they've been a victim of discrimination here in the city of Chicago, please do not hesitate to contact the Chicago Commission on Human Relations at 312-744-4111. Again, that is 312-74111. We're on Facebook, we're on LinkedIn, Instagram, X, or formerly Twitter, and most recently Blue Sky. And remember, until next time, think before you hate.